became an end-of-life doula. Gosh, you know how time is. I'm going to say probably 7 years ago. And um, so well, let's see. Um, I have been doing a number of educational classes through the Westville Public Library over this is the third year. So I think that's why um, Elizabeth recommended me to do this today, work with you, or be with you all today to share.
Yeah, and so everybody, again, we are talking about the Book of Two Ways by Jodi Picoult. And in this book, Dawn Edelstein is a death doula in one of the storylines. She's a death doula. Jackie, can you tell us about that?
Well, tell about her experience, my experience,
Both.
what
Well,
I think of,
here's a question. Was
all
it
of it.
true to life or not? Like, what did you think about the book?
Oh, I love the book. I think I reached out to you. I heard it was 400 pages. I just personally don't have a lot of time to read. And well, it sounded really interesting, and I wanted to participate. I was a little concerned that I would have the time to complete a 400-page book, but I think I had it completed in like 3 days. I found it very engrossing in terms of about the book and the end of life, how she portrayed a death doula or end of life doula, or um, there we go by a number of names, a death midwife. I think she did great research for the book. I don't know that I would ever know that she didn't have the experience and wasn't truly a death doula. She gave lots of good introductory information and explanation about death and dying. I think she laid the foundation for a lot of things related to death and dying and covered many topics, which I was really surprised on how many topics around death and dying she covered. I really appreciated all of her contemplative questions that she posed throughout the book. Of course, her first one being as she was introducing her role, um, when she meets with a client the first time or when they become her client, what's left unfinished being a key question as an end of life doula or a death doula. But I also want to put a point on a quote she made in there, which is, "You're alive until you're not." And I think that's a really important perspective in thinking about death and dying, that yes, we may be actually, I mean, we may be dying, but we're alive. Even right now, we're dying. So we're alive until we're not. So making as much full use of our life until that last day, um, I think is a wonderful perspective, and I think kind of the basis of how working as an end of life doula maybe is a little bit different than hospice, although they do, as a hospice nurse, we talked about that. It, it was it was just different. It's hospice is just different than end of life doula work in that regard.
Can you tell us how you got into the work?
Yeah, so as I said, I was a hospice nurse, and while I love that work, I there were aspects of it that just after a while didn't align well with my philosophy about death and dying and my approach. And I started exploring other options, and I found the whole topic of death and end of life doulas, and I researched it and took a training, and that's how I became one.
How long does the training last, and where do you do that?
Well, the training I did was up near Detroit, Michigan, and gosh, trying to remember what the training was. It was a 3 or 4 day training. Like it started on a Friday and went to Monday around noon, if I remember correctly. It's been so long ago, I don't even remember. Um, yeah. And then we did follow-up calls, talking about establishing kind of a practice and having a support group, a support system of other end-of-life doulas.
So with your business now, what does that look like? So if somebody, we had several examples in the book of interacting with clients and families. So can you kind of walk us through what is it like in real life? How does somebody go from contacting you to the
Well,
end?
it's an interest, yeah, it's an interesting practice because there's kind of a lot of different ways you can go with it. Some people focus only on vigil work, which is sitting with people who are dying. Some people, as the way she put it, is her job. She saw her job as mining histories, which I love that phrase because it works so well with her archaeology and Egyptology and her work, mining histories, putting together a picture of who they were in their life. I wish, I kind of wish that's one way that I feel that this work is different than hospice, having done both. So much time is spent in hospice on the here and now and working with that dying person, as opposed to seeing that bigger picture of who they were all throughout their life. I would personally, as a hospice nurse, ask to see pictures of the person and of their family to get a fuller idea of who they've been as a person, to help formulate in my mind a more three-dimension, or a four-dimensional person, as opposed to just this person who's dying. And it was very helpful to do that. So of course, gathering and sharing information, anticipating whatever needs, creating a plan is a big piece of it. As she stated, being a general contractor of death was her role. Mine varies. My own kind of take, or how I've done my work, is that it's quite different that in that I spend a lot of time on end of life education. That's one of the roles that I see helpful, and one of the reasons I got into doing this type work as opposed to the hospice. As a hospice nurse, after a period of time, it became I became very acutely aware of how ill prepared we are to die. And I saw that as having such a deleterious effect on the way people died and the way the families experienced death and coped with the dying process. And I felt like I wanted to try to change that paradigm to where, if at all possible, those people who are interested in learning more about death and dying and the preparation for it beforehand, I would provide that information to the public. And so that's been a large part of my focus. And while she talks about spending time with people, again, that point I made about you're alive until you're not, I spend even more time talking about, I kind of zoom out from that even further than how she deals with it with people dying, in that I work with individuals about living a mindfulness of mortality to create a good death to the greatest extent that might be possible for them. And I see it as a process throughout life, not just when you have a grave um, diagnosis or know that you're dying, but right now. I mean, I have people that come to me that are in their 30s and say, my family doesn't talk, my grandmother just died. My family doesn't want to talk about it. I want to learn about it. I want to do something to help make my death better than my grandmother's was, because I observed a lot of things that I wouldn't want, and I felt there was a lot of unpreparedness. So my work is starting now, no matter your age, and becoming prepared for dying by living what I call a mindfulness of mortality. And I wrote a book about that, and I think you have it at the, I think it's available somewhere at the library, but it's a workbook. It's kind of like a workbook that takes you through kind of the steps of living a mindfulness of mortality, and has prompts in it to ask yourself about relationships in your life. One of the things I saw as a hospice nurse was um, relationships that had been fractured many years before, and not having time at the time somebody was dying to repair those relationships. So it's about asking yourself questions about relationships and what might need repaired, and none of us knows when we're going to die. So really thinking in terms of, I had a argument with somebody, and thinking, I'm sure many of you had parents who said, don't go to bed angry, right? And I think that's because, there was that kind of fear that people would die in their sleep, and you don't want to have that on you for the rest of your life, thinking about how you didn't have that opportunity to repair whatever was said, as an example. I could go on, I could go on and on and on about this for hours. So you can stop me whenever you'd like. So
Well, we can.
that's one part. And I'm sorry. Let me just go over real quick. Another part of what I do is after death, natural alternatives. Like she mentioned the home funeral. I do home funerals. I train families how to have a home funeral for a loved one. I serve as a green burial consultant. I work with a green burial nature preserve, and they make referrals to me, and I work with the family regarding that process. So that's also a part of what I do. And then the coaching that I said, where I coach people through the book and that type of thing.
So, in the book, so we notice that we have, kind of two pathways that happen right at the beginning. So have you ever found, can you think of something in your professional life where that was the pivotal moment, or maybe you're like, do I change now? I should have changed now. Did this make you think about anything, where if you could go back and redo, you would?
Well, I think that's kind of how I got into being an end of life doula. My work every day with the dying in the hospice, just death was in my face every day in my work, and I took that very seriously, and it caused take it made me pause to look at my life at every moment of every day almost, because of having death right there in my life all the time. So one of the things I took a second look at was my work in hospice, and thinking, is this really the type of work? Is this how I want to be working with the dying? Not that there's anything wrong with hospice at all. I mean, they do wonderful work. I have my issues with certain parts of it just because it doesn't align with certain philosophies that I have. But um, I would say my work with the dying kind of was a pivotal moment, one of the pivotal moments in my career and in my life.
That makes sense. So Dodie has a question. Is nursing or medical knowledge or experience necessary to become an end-of-life doula?
Mm-mm. No, I mean, it's certainly beneficial to know certain things, but no, because you don't do medical care and you actually don't do any real personal care. Um, the greatest thing is just a desire to be with people who are dying. I mean, if that's something that you feel called to and is in your heart to do, that's the most important thing, I would say.
Well, thank you. Do you
And
know if
and
it's
in
part?
terms of, no,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Well, my question was, do
No, I
you
was
know if
just going to
it's?
say,
You go right ahead. Go ahead.
okay. Well, what I was going to say is that at the same time, I would suggest that you've had some, if you're going to become an end of life doula, you've had some experience around death and dying. It's kind of like when I was in nursing school, and people would say they always wanted to be a nurse, and then they got into nursing school, and then one day when they had to be around blood, they couldn't be around blood. I mean, you need to be sure that it's something you can really be around because it's not like it's an easy thing to do. It's challenging work. The other thing I would recommend is that you've had a fair amount of work with, and I don't mean like literal work, like paid work or anything, but you've been around a diverse groups of people and have seen dynamics of families. And because when somebody is dying, it's a strain on the family system, and all kinds of issues in the family come out. And and it can be, I mean, that's one of the most challenging parts in hospice, is dealing with family dynamics and the way they're dealing with things. So just some considerations, but there's no, you don't have to have medical experience. I would recommend maybe volunteering for a while with a hospice as somebody that sits vigil, like in a nursing home with individuals who are dying, just for the experience, but you don't need any medical knowledge.
Do you know if the kind of education that you provide, do you know if any of that is given to in medical school or nursing school?
Um, well, I became a nurse many, many years ago, and I'm not up on it, but I don't know for sure that it has. Maybe there's a chapter in a book somewhere, but certainly nothing to any great extent. In medical school, I know there are certain programs in in different universities that are trying to do more of that kind of education with doctors or med students, just because doctors are very ill prepared to deal with people who are dying as well as a whole.
Okay, thank you. So can you tell us is there a part of the book that you loved, that you told somebody else, that you marked it, anything like that?
Well, I have all kinds of like pages of um, mm, well, I love the part where she talks about the 5 things to say to people before they die. Um, I think those are beautiful words that should be spoken. Of course, I think there's words that should be spoken all the time, not waiting just for death. Um, You know, I forgive you. Please forgive me. I love you. Thank you. I mean, I think that's just a great rule of thumb for life. But certainly at death, those are five things that are necessary or helpful to say. Um, Let me think. I don't I have all kinds of things marked in here. Let me see what this was. Oh, and the things that one bit of information I thought was really helpful is when she went over things you shouldn't do when someone's dying. I think those are that was wonderful that she included that in there.
Could you list a couple of those,
Uh,
or if you know them
sure.
off the top of your head?
Well, you know, like the the things we say to mean well, but really sound a little flippant if you sit and think about it, like you're going to beat this cancer, be positive, be strong, hang in there. Um, while, like I said, while our intention is good, that's not really what I would call being fully present with that person without, I mean, not checking in with them. Another one, she said, don't overreact your happiness. Like, don't try to cheer yourself up to cheer them up. Like, meeting them where they are is a big part of the work. Um, Thinking you have to discuss the illness is another part. And this is goes along with a class I give that's called Being with Dying, and that is don't be afraid to sit in silence with someone. There's a tendency out of our own, discomfort a bit about being around somebody dying to want to make conversation and recognizing that just being with them is powerful, really powerful.
So on the flip side of that, was there anything in the book where you were like, no, 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 in terms of the job, or that you would wish she hadn't said that?
No, no, not at all. I guess if there was anything that I felt maybe, I loved her relationship with Win. I love that. Um, but I saw her being kind of the perfect kind of patient for or a person perfect client for an end of life doula. I would say as a general rule, most people aren't that consciously aware and have that self insight and reflection. And even if they have that, necessarily the ability to communicate that during that time. Um, so that felt a little um, not Hollywoodish, but the not realistic. I mean, it's optimal, but maybe not realistic. So that's the only thing. But I think it's admirable to put out there, as something to strive for.
Would you get, if somebody asked you about your job or your life with this job, is this a book that you would give them to give them a good idea, despite the story and
Um,
drama?
yeah, I've thought about that, and I I I have thought that there might be a opportunity or so to do that. The only thing is it is a long, involved book, and if that's exactly what they're looking for, that information, you know, it would depend on the person, really. Not that there's anything wrong with the information she provided. It's just, it's a lot of other this other storyline and the other things going on.
That's fair. So one question, have you ever been asked to address the death of a pet or an animal?
Mm-mm.
No?
No, I
Okay.
haven't. Mm-mm. No.
And
And
with
of
what,
course, I think, I, no, I think in the book she made note of the fact that, as I said earlier, death doulas don't provide personal care, and of course, don't offer any kind of or participate in any assisted suicide at all.
well, within what you do, are there specific things that can and cannot be done since it is different than hospice? Um, like what are some of those specific, besides personal care, what are some of those differences?
Well, of course, no consultation regarding medications, giving them or explaining them or having any involvement with the medications that the person is receiving. Um, that's a big one. Trying to think if there's anything else. Um, I think the other point to make is that if there is hospice involved, that it is a team effort, and to be sure to be able to integrate within that team and not um, see oneself as separate and wanting to do things without communicating with the hospice team. That's a really important piece to bring up.
Well, how do you interact? So often in these situations, there's a lot of interaction between like hospitals where the person is, facilities, things like that. How do you deal with the relationships like that? Are they favorable or not?
Um, I can only I can only address that the actual end of life doula care that I've done in the past, the people have always been home. So I can't really address the hospital except the home funeral green burial piece, um, when people have died in the hospital. And I've worked with the family in coordinating the green burial and getting the person out of the hospital and to the grave site. Um, and there it's all about education, like how how they don't know anything outside kind of their medical box. Um, it can be very challenging because people in the hospital aren't aware of natural burials or what that involves or anything. So again, that's the other educational piece for me. Community education with with hospitals and facilities.
Marvelous. And we've got a slew of questions now in chat. Terry asks, do you have many clients that have dementia? And would you be working more with the family than with the person with dementia that's dying?
No, I personally don't. My experience is oftentimes because dementia is such a long, progressive disease, most families, even in my hospice work, the person was in a facility. Um, I do know, I'm just going to interject this. I just recently learned of a woman, she's not here in Ohio, who's who was recently hired by a facility as an end of life doula to work there with their residents, which I thought was wonderful. Um, so I don't have that experience in terms of the dementia piece of it. Um, those weren't any of the clients that I've had. I mean, I've had them in hospice, but I haven't had them as an end of life doula.
Okay, thank you. The next question, do you feel that the entire family is the client or just the dying person? Because in the book, the dying person's husband was involved also.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Everybody and anybody. I mean, animals, uh, family members, dear ones, loved ones, friends, whoever is a significance in this person's life is a part of it. If they've been a part of their life, they certainly should be a part of their death.
Harry asks, is there a minimum amount of visits that you give a family? Do you advise siblings or other family members outside of the immediate family?
I think she covered this a little bit in the book, but it's so hard. It's so individualized. It depends on their prognosis, how long they have to live, their diagnosis, the family support. It depends on so many things to know, to be able to put a number on it. Um, really isn't possible. I mean, I could explain to you the home funeral process, but in terms of the end of life doula, it's so individualized.
That actually is the next
I'm
question
sorry,
in
I
the
can't be
chat.
more specific than that.
That's okay. I mean,
Oh,
that
okay.
answers it. That
What
does
is
answer
that?
it. So the next question is, what is a home funeral? And she says, my friends have had what I thought was a funeral or wake at home, and all they had to do was move the furniture and set up a table for the potluck. So what is a home funeral?
Oh, wow. I want to hear, does anybody who's asking that question, would they like to talk with me about that situation? Because I'd really be interested in hearing
Like
about
now?
that. And
Like
then
like now?
I'm happy to. Yeah.
Like
Mhm.
like now? Yeah, my dad died, and rather than have the wake at the funeral home, his body was donated to the medical school, so we didn't have a body. And we just had the way his dad had it, that we just it's a small town, and there's whole lot of funeral customs, and one of them is that you put in the paper um, when they died and when the calling hours are, and then it's announced on the radio. Um, and
Mm.
so it was announced that the friends may call from 2 to 4 and 7 to 9 at the home. And so people came to the house, and we had the uh, Catholics have a thing, you know, this Dodi, the sick call set. So you have a crucifix with candles to the side, and we had that set up. And so I mean, he wasn't sick anymore, but it made a nice centerpiece. And we had that, and people came in and sat around the living room and talked, and just like you would at a funeral home, and stayed a while, and all of that. And then another friend, um, he was cremated. And so a few weeks after his death, they had a potluck party at their house, and that was word of mouth, that friends were told that there's going to be a funeral. And they had a bagpiper come through and play, and then he left. And then a few people said some stuff, and some memories, and then we had the potluck.
Oh,
So
nice.
yeah, and then
Yeah.
Steve went around and with a recorder and asked people to record memories of Larry for his wife and
Mm.
family. That was
Mm.
it. Yeah. So
It's really nice.
yeah.
So how that differs a little bit. I mean, that can be a part of a home funeral, but It differs a bit in the way that I'm accustomed to mainly doing home funerals, and that is a person oftentimes will be um, on hospice. They die at home, and then the family wants them to be there until their burial or until their cremation. So my work is with the family and loved ones and caring for the body and teaching them how to bathe the person afterward if they would like to do that. Oftentimes, if they don't want to do that, then the hospice nurse will come and do that. And then after that, dressing them in whatever outfit they had prepared for them to be buried in or cremated in, and teaching them how to cool the body down, how to take it's called techni ice, take the ice away and bring in more ice. It's the first 24 hours that, it takes the body to start really cooling down because, it's, and placing it on key, the major organ places where all the heat in the body is. So teaching, finding out about music they might want played during this process, um, providing support if they want people to come in and view the body. Some people uh, don't want to do that because as a culture, we're not accustomed to seeing a person dead without being fixed up. Or, I mean, not that families won't put makeup on them. Sometimes they do, but they're not embalmed. So they're going to look very different. They're going to look like somebody who's dead. And but the family is okay with that, and they encourage people to come. And we either leave them on the bed. Usually it's a hospital bed if they have hospice. So, and oftentimes that might be in the living room or dining room or somewhere during their last days of care, either leaving them there or putting them on like a massage table or a table of some kind, and having a viewing in the home and having music playing, having similar to what you said about people sharing memories, writing in a book, or having an actual formal process of sharing, and providing that support until the day of the cremation or burial. And yeah, it's also the other part of it is guiding the family through the process. You need the death certificate, you need a burial permit. So working with the family ahead of time to understand and for them to designate somebody to take care of those things, so the person can be buried or cremated after their death.
Jackie, I'm going to share the screen real quick of your website that lists. So can you guys see this? So the resources. Yeah, hospice, end of life, green burial. So this is on Jackie's website, inthecircleoflife.com, and it's under the resource button. But it was.
And there's also should be a tab at the top about green burials and home funerals that kind of explain it as well.
Yep. Education. Yeah, this was very. This is a bunch of what you've talked about so far. So these very interesting.
Yeah, these are the classes, the different topics that I present on.
Yep. But since you mentioned it, I was like, wait, I just saw that. Teresa also asked.
Have you all been given my website address, or should I go ahead and give that?
You can go ahead and give that, or type it into the chat. Everybody's going to get a transcript of the.
Oh, okay.
After this, along with a link to the website.
Okay.
But
will
Teresa
do it right now.
asks,
Is that
does a
okay?
strong, oh
Okay.
yeah.
Mhm.
But Teresa asks, does a strong religious belief help?
Help in dying, or is that the question? Help in dying?
I see nodding.
Oh, okay. Um, I would, yes, I would say so. That's been my experience, that it that it helps. Um, certainly, that's been my experience.
I have a question.
But
I know,
also, yeah, no, but also, as I said before, really doing some work before you die. There's a part of death in the dying process that's called the transition. And just as birth has a transition part to it, death has a transition part. And the transition part is the part where the person's really doing a lot of inner work, reviewing their life, kind of processing everything. And so I, I think personally, what I experienced as a lot of restlessness and agitation at the end of life and at that transitional space had to do with not not really looking at some important things about their life and waiting to the very end, and wrestling with the fact that they can't go back and change anything, or they can't go back and fix something, or they can't go back and have a conversation with somebody, and the angst that creates at the end of life. So really emphasizing the importance of looking at that before death for a more peaceful death.
so on that note, I read a couple of reviews about the book, and the book came out during the pandemic, and it apparently quickly went to #1, as a lot of people felt, since a lot of people were losing. I mean, probably all of us know one degree or shortly therefore somebody who's died of COVID. And apparently that really made this book fly off the shelves as that sort of introspection. So it was apparently well / badly timed. One of my questions, one of my questions is, have you ever been fired? Like, because I know tensions run high in these kind of things. I have heard some hospice stories that were not great. So
I have not ever been fired. I will say in hospice, there have been families that it's like in life. You know how some people you connect with better than other people? And there might have been a couple people that it wasn't a great connection. But like you said, because emotions run high, and yeah, there's a lot. If there's a dysfunction in the family or dysfunction within certain members of the family, they're likely to be triggered at the end of life. So sometimes the hospice team is the punching bag in those situations. And, there's not really anything you can do about that, really.
you go in there expecting that? I mean, at least the fact that it could happen.
Anticipating, oh yeah, anticipating that. Yeah, I mean, you naturally try to walk as gingerly as you can on this path with them, but you can say one thing, and just like any other situation, it can set somebody off, and that can be it. One family member might you know, most of the family members might love you, but if you get one who doesn't love you, it can create a lot of chaos and problems for everybody else.
I have run into the end of my questions. Does anybody else have any questions or comments, or what do you think of the book? Just in general, this is a book club. Feel free to unmute.
I've read some of Picoult's things. Picoult, is that how you say her name? The things before, and she's done some wonderful things. This felt like a boat payment. She wanted a trip to Egypt, and this was the way to do it. Create a horrible main character. And I just think I've read reviews online about how that Dawn, you know, and here she had the love of her life, and of course she was going to go off with what's his name and go off into Egypt. And does that woman have no responsibility? And you can create characters like that, but I think the reactions, when I read the reviews, the reactions just made me feel so bad for the future of our country, our human race, our everything. It was just so awful that, you know, okay, I've got a child, but she's going to graduate soon, and so I can go off to Egypt with this guy. And the child obviously needs her. And it was like, you know, she's married to a mensch. She's married to my dad. She's married to a nice guy. And, you know, that doesn't matter. You've got to go off with the guy who can't call her by her correct name. He gives her a nickname. She doesn't. He misplaces his emotions. He's mad at his boss, and he takes it out on her. This is all signs of abuse coming down the track. And no, he's the wonderful guy. And I think he's a jerk. He's a total jerk. You know, get out of there. You are not your best self with this man. I couldn't finish it. I thought, why am I doing this to myself? This is horrible. You know, I can go read some dime store novel from the turn of the last century and enjoy it more. You know, I mean, the stuff about the doula was very interesting. The stuff about Egypt was very interesting, but her and the relationships, and it was just boat payment.
I agree that I really enjoyed all the informational stuff, all the Egyptian, all the death doulas. Knew about death doulas before, or anything, and that was great. But that personal life stuff, and she was such an airhead, where he's suddenly dropping everything and doing this, and not even considering anybody else's feelings. I mean, look, she was just crushing, and I read the whole thing, but if I could have just read the Egypt and death doula stuff, that's what I would have chosen to read. I did learn a lot with that.
So honestly, I don't like Jodi Picoult. I don't like, and because to like a book, I have to like the characters. That's why, honestly, that's why I'm reading the book. And I never like her characters. I always think I would never be friends with you, and I don't want to hang out or listen to you.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
yeah. And good storyteller, bad people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But FYI,
I did.
You did.
I ditto that. She was very narcissistic. Very narcissistic.
So for those of you who read the book, the woman who was dying also had a lost love, a first love that she didn't have fulfilled, so to speak. How did you feel about that whole part of the book at the end, where she wanted to see him one more time, and she had this beautiful, faithful husband who was there by her side for the death? I was upset with the dead person, or not the dying person, who couldn't think of anything but this lost love from her youth. That was upsetting to me. And I was happy that the main character, I'm sorry, I can't remember her name, when she went to find that guy back in England or whatever, that she didn't follow through, and like that, I thought that was one of the better parts of the story, that there was some redeeming quality of that. So I'm just interested in your reactions to that.
I agree with you entirely on that. I was upset that the person was pushing to do that because, yes, she had a wonderful husband. He was taking care of her and doing all the things that a lot of husbands wouldn't be able to do when that sort of situation is happening. And then she wants this guy from, and this other guy is happily married and has a wonderful family, and it would have really whole thing. It just did make, that is one thing the main character did right.
Right. Yeah. Well, except I disagree. I hope it's okay if I give my 2 cents worth.
That's why we're here.
I would never, as an end of life doula, undertaken that. I would not have said that I would do that. I think that shows bad taste and bad judgment. I don't, like we said about the main character, I don't know, kind of, hopefully by the time you die, you've grown up and you've just accepted certain things in your life, that comes with maturity and wisdom, hopefully. Yeah, we all have things we wish were different, but at some point in your life, you just kind of got to grow up. That's
Jackie,
my
then I have a
opinion.
question for you about that, because in literature throughout time, in movies, everything, deathbed confessions, statements in extremis, that seems to be a thing. Is that like a regular thing? Do people do that all the time? Tell you the deep dark secret that they couldn't tell anybody else?
Not. I don't think it's as popular as they make it sound. It has not been my experience. It happens, but that's different than making a request for somebody to, like, take care of your unfinished business. That kind of unfinished business. I just wouldn't have any interest in. Yeah, that just wouldn't be of interest to me
And yet you
when it
said
comes to
that,
relationships.
yeah, and you had said that you should try to finish, that when someone's dying, they look at some unfinished
yeah.
business in their life, like a relationship that was maybe fractured. And I was wondering, was this one of those unfinished business things that she threw in the book?
Um, yeah, well, oh boy. I think there's always going to be, we're never going to be able to finish all the business in our life, right? And certain unfinished business is finishable in a respectable kind of way. Um, I, I, I just see it as in a different category. Like if she really wanted to finish that business, she should have finished that business, many years ago
A little,
herself.
yeah. The little backstory. Apparently, she got Jodi Picoult got the idea for this. Her son was studying Egyptology, and she went, and when he was doing his thesis on the Egyptian Book of Two Ways, and she apparently said, "That's a great title for a book." And then and then it was her son's wedding, and she was sitting beside his Egyptology thesis professor, and they started talking about this, and this is apparently how this whole thing rolled out. But she sat on it for a while, and then when the pandemic came out, it was scheduled to be released, and they were like, is this the right time for this subject? And they pushed the button. But yeah, so it was this little, I always wonder how authors get ideas, but I thought this was neat. It was very much like her son studies this on purpose. and she went with him to Egypt and got all this lowdown on stuff. It's real interesting.
Mhm.
I do love it when they include like an author's note or whatever and explain how they came up with the ideas and all of the,
Mhm.
is that they had to look into, and then this popped up and then that. I always like that.
I think it's on her website, and she has photos of some of the there was the drawings in the book, and she has photos of some of those on her website of the real thing.
So does anybody have any read alike suggestions for like, if you like this, then you should read this? And it doesn't have to be the same topic. It can just feel like it. Okay, the librarian shall speak. Anyway, so, read alike if you. So Jodi Picoult is what is known as a literary author, which sounds like, of course, she writes stuff, but it's the tone where it's well written, and the ending isn't always happy, but it's like a deep read where it's well written. There are a lot of details, things like that, where you get into the intricacies of both things, professions, people's lives, all of that. And some books that read like this, that deal with both mental and physical issues. So one is Still Alice by Lisa Genova. They actually made a movie about this. And somebody has early onset Alzheimer's, and it talks about like their transition. Another one is Hausfrau, Hausfrau by Jill Alexander Essbaum, Essbaum. And it's about a lady in suburban Zurich with her Swiss banker husband, and it's basically about the inner life of somebody, kind of like in this story where it's supposedly idyllic, but then how does it really feel to the people involved? Louise Erdrich is a good literary author. It's called Shadow Tag. 2 words. After she discovers that her husband has been reading her diary, Irene America turns into, it turns into a manipulative farce while secretly keeping a second diary that includes her true thoughts, through which the reader learns of Irene's shaky marriage, its effect on her children, and her struggles with alcohol. So yeah, all of these, like the inner life, this sounds awful, the inner lives of housewives is where, like, women characters, you get their inner thoughts. It is often first person, so you lose the perspective of other readers, but you get some deep cultural, emotional, sociological things in these. So if you enjoyed this and the way it was written specifically, you should try those other books. Okay. Now, even if it wasn't like this, does anybody have any recommendations? Especially, and I hate to say this, if you kind of need to wash the taste out of your mouth, if you really didn't like it, is there, you're like, you know what, you should actually read this. Does anybody have any suggestions? You can see everybody thinking. I love that.
I spent a lot of time reading trade books, books on death. So if I'm going to read a book, it's usually something about death, not fiction, but nonfiction. So
one nonfiction recommendation I have on this subject, it's called the Book of Eulogies, and it is a beautiful masterpiece. What it is nonfiction, and they take some famous people's eulogies, or it might have been somebody famous's husband, wife, child, and then they're writing the eulogy, and it's amazing. I cried so much. But it also automatically makes you think, how would you describe somebody that you loved? Like over and over again. And I kind of want to make this next year, Tell Me More, and get somebody who writes obituaries to talk about it, and how you glean these things to be able to write about somebody maybe who you don't know. And thus, if you do know them, how would you write it? But yeah, the Book of Eulogies. I really recommend that, and we do own it.
Oh, sounds interesting.
It's neat. Anybody else with either author or title recommendations of any subject? Or what's the last book you read that you liked?
Kate
Oh, let me
DeMillo.
just say, oops.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say a recommendation. Since I mentioned the stage of transitioning and dying, there's a wonderful book out. Oh gosh, I don't remember her last name now, but it's called Dying a Transition, and it's a wonderful book about that stage of death. If
Oh,
you have any interest in reading it, I wish I could remember the woman's name.
Monica Wren.
Yes, Monica Wren. Hmm.
Are you going to
She's
include
of
those? Oops. Are you going to include those recommendations in an email, Jessica?
I am actually typing them into the chat as we speak.
wonderful.
Sorry, Jackie, go ahead.
No, 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 no. That's okay. That's okay.
I just heard about, is it Kate DiCamillo? Is that how you say her name? The children's author? Yeah, she was on Krista Tippett's On Being. It's a show about a radio show about spirituality on Sunday mornings. And she was on there, and I had read some of her things before, and I can't remember which one I read, but I really, they're books for middle schoolers, high schoolers, so they're a quick read, but they just stick with you. The lyric goals, community building, loss, spirituality, whatever you want to call it, that's in there is just really, really nice. And I read Sam Quinones, is that how you say his name? Quinones, about the opioids, especially the opioids in Ohio, and Dreamland and the Least of Us, and Brian Alexander's Glass House and Hospital about Lancaster and Bryan, Ohio, respectively. Those were good. Definitely downers, but they're good.
I like a little bit of romantic suspense myself. I do like Nora Roberts, especially the ones that are standalones. So what's the last one? Three Fates. Nora Roberts' Three Fates. Single book. Talks about a family in both America and Ireland. Suspenseful, but with a happy ending, which I need.
I just read a book, I think I'm tired of World War II books, but this was a World War II book that I really thought was really good. And it was the Book of Lost Names. And I don't remember the author, but that's what I just finished. It was very, very good, written well. I had to read it into the night.
Kristen Harmel. Yep. I'm trying to find these all on the system so I can put them on the chat. Let's see. The other one, so if you liked the part of the story where it was actually diverging fates, where you could see two kind of timelines, there is a movie called Sliding Doors. It is a British film from like the 90s with Gwyneth Paltrow, and it is a romantic comedy drama, everything, and it is exactly that, where it follows two timelines. I know we own it. I know it's like you can rent, it's on Netflix, all of those things. So again, if you like that. Okay.
I had two questions. One was, have you studied very many other cultures and how they deal with death. And the second question was are there any very unusual experiences that you have had that you were surprised that it happened, and how did you deal with it?
Thank you. Those are great questions. You know, unfortunately, I have a book on my nightstand that I keep meaning to start reading about other cultures and death. I've skimmed the surface of other cultures very minimally, unfortunately, because I think it is important that I research that more. Um, gosh, hmm. Ah. Could you repeat your second question? I'm sorry, specifically. I have all kinds of thoughts running through my head.
Are there any very unusual experiences that you have had that surprised you and you were not quite sure how to handle it?
Uh, no, not that I can really think of. Um, I'm not sure this is the kind of what you're looking for, but there's a couple things. One is just personally with when somebody is about to die, I get a sensation on the left side of my body of this tingling. It's like I don't like I know that they're totally their spirit is leaving their body and it comes into me on my left side. That was something that started early in my hospice career, which I didn't know how to. I mean, it caught me off guard, but it's a very reassuring feeling for me now when that happens. Um, One is an elderly woman who was 90, oh, how old would she have been? 94 maybe. As she was dying, it was the most amazing thing. And it's the only time it's ever happened. And I've spoken with another nurse who had a loved one, it happened to her too. And she felt a degree of comfort knowing that somebody else had experienced it. As this woman was dying, like within a half hour before she completely passed, her face started changing, and she appeared to be getting younger. And I felt like she was being filled with the light of this Holy Spirit, and it was transforming her in such a way that she had a glow about her, and she just appeared to be like maybe a teenager. It was just an amazing, and the light in her eyes that came out at that time was just, it was phenomenal. Um, it felt like a mystical experience for me to see this transition. I haven't seen anything like it since, or before, but it was it was beautiful. It was just so beautiful to see.
Did anyone else witness it with you at that time, or were you
Uh-huh.
alone with her?
No, her daughter and her granddaughter were there, and her granddaughter also especially noticed it.
That's a very cool experience. Thank you for sharing that, because maybe
Sure.
for us, when we're near someone who's very close to death, we might kind of look for that or see. I know when my father died, it was just within a few hours, but it sounded like his voice in my head saying, I'm okay, I'm at peace. And then it went away. And I talked to a friend and he said he had the same experience when his father died, that it was very quick, but it was very, again, what you were saying, it was very peaceful. It was because there was a lot of hubbub around. And it was just I just stopped. And then after that, it was really very, extremely peaceful.
Mm. Yeah.
So I wanted to share with you, I put a couple of books in the chat. So when I was in grad school, in between school, I'd pick a subject and then read about it to death. And the one time I did it about death. And so I found a whole bunch of books that were not morbid at all. So one is called Smoke Gets in Your Eyes, and it talks about the funerary custom of cremation. And it is interesting, but also super funny. And I like that people can write about it this way and tell the experiences in this different ways that this can happen. The other one, very popular, Stiff the Curious Lives of Human Cadavers by Mary Roach. And that is marvelous. And it's about everything that you
I
can do
haven't
with the
never heard
body.
that.
Oh my goodness. It's basically, think of every way that you can use a body besides burying it after somebody dies. And these are known as narrative nonfiction. So it reads like a fictional book, but it's not. It's nonfiction. It's very storytelling and
wow.
engaging. And then the last one is called Being Dead is No Excuse. Oh my goodness. It talks about some of the Southern funerary customs and just how entirely hilarious they are, and all these little anecdotes about, you put
Wow.
Auntie on the porch and put a mint julep in her hand one more time, that kind of thing. And it is marvelous. So there are all kinds of books out there that talk about all aspects of this in every kind of tone that you can think of. Okay. So if you want to feel a certain way about something and learn about it, you can get first person perspectives in fiction. Just, pick a side or pick a topic and there will be a book about it. If you want to do it about nonfiction, people tend to think of nonfiction often as just tell me how this works. And oh boy, there's a lot more to it than that. So there are letters, there are like the Book of Eulogies, I would call it a letter format. The rest of these, a lot of these are reporters turned authors who are just like, I have got to write this stuff down. And thank goodness they did and published it. So
Wow.
there are some absolute gems out there. So
Jackie's description of saying that she feels this sensation in part of her body reminded me of a book I read by a doctor who worked in a nursing, he was a gerontologist, I think he worked in nursing facilities, and there was a cat that was a resident of the nursing home. I can't remember the name of it. I think it was the name of the cat, and how that particular cat just lived at the nursing home. But if that cat went and slept on a particular person's bed, it was a harbinger of the fact that the person was going to pass like within a day. But I can't remember the name of it. And that was also, I felt like that was kind of a cool book too. It wasn't depressing. It was just interesting and gave you that sense of the spirit. There's just that foreboding kind of thing. I don't know. It wasn't in a negative sense, but just, it was good. I enjoyed it. I think that sometimes animals have a more sensitive spirit link to people, especially at the end of their lives. That's just my personal opinion.
The name of that book? Because I remember reading it.
I can't remember the name of it, and it seems to me that it had the name of the cat in it, and I just can't recall it.
Oh, okay, because I remember reading about in that facility, the cat coming in, and gosh, it wasn't the one with the guitarist that would come in and play for the ER or something?
No, this was strictly about the cat. If at least that's how I remember it. It's been a while since I read it.
Oscar.
I did read Oscar?
Yeah.
Okay.
Ah,
I did read Being Dead is Not an Excuse, and it is a cute book, and it gives you recipes to take to calling hours, Southern recipes that are popular. So
Oh, wow.
yeah, that
Mm.
was cute.
The other book that I put on there is called When Breath Becomes Air, and it's about cancer. Kathy, I see you. Yeah. So
Yeah,
I
I read
read
that.
that. It was so good. I
Yeah.
was afraid to read it, but oh my, it was great.
What
Yeah,
is it about?
he talks about how he was dying. And I mean, it's been a while since I've read it, so I don't know all the details, but I remember
Thank you.
dying, and it talks about all the things that he was going through at the time. And I just remember finishing that going, boy, that was a lot nicer to read than I thought it was gonna
well,
be.
imagine if you knew exactly what was happening to you as a neurosurgeon,
Yes.
and then you can explain
read
it
that
as it's
too.
happening. And that's a disconnect that,
I read
that
that too.
happens.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. Very good.
Hmm.
Okay, does anybody else have any other questions or comments? And
Um,
thank you, TK, for Teresa, for putting your book list on. I was trying to type them in and I couldn't spell
Those are
Di
just the-
Camilio.
Yeah, got
There's
stuck.
if I could mention a really good documentary. Oops,
Yeah.
excuse me.
Mhm.
It's called A Will for the Woods, and it's about I think he's a psychologist, I can't remember if he's a psychologist or a psychiatrist, but it's his journey of having cancer and making a wooded area a place for natural burials, and him being involved with a woodworker in making his casket. And it's a really good documentary.
I also want to make a plug for a movie called Wit, W-I-T. And it is a fiction movie. It had Emma Thompson in it. And it was about, she was dying from cancer. But it was about her being in the hospital and her experience with the medicine, not so much that she was dying from cancer, but all the things she experienced because of the treatment. And my entire family says everybody should watch this so that you know that you have choices and some of the consequences of the choices. But yeah, Wit with Emma Thompson. I'm gonna put that in too. I put the link for the documentary A Will for the Woods, but Search Ohio is down right now, but it is in there. April 30th, you can get in there and request that documentary.
Okay. And when my mom died, Dodi gave me a book. Do you remember what the book was, Dodi?
It was by Fanny Flagg, and I cannot remember something about heaven. The word heaven was in it, but Fanny Flagg was the author. And it was kind of a little bit humorous, but it was very sweet, and it was kind of comforting to me about death. It was fiction, but whatever gives you comfort. So, okay.
Can't wait to get to heaven.
Can't wait to get to heaven.
It was good.
No. I don't see that one. I might be spelling it wrong. Yeah, it doesn't look as though we have that one, but we can get it. So.
It's probably an older book, which may be why it's not too available.
Okay.
I had an experience last weekend. We went to look for rugs, and this lady, we never met her before. We were talking about rugs, and all of a sudden she started talking about her son and how her son was had died. He was a bartender in New Orleans, and when they went to the hospital, their family already had a signal, which when they put their hands, the fingers open, it meant let go. And when the fingers were closed, it meant I want to still keep fighting. So they went to the hospital. He was 50 years old, and there was a nurse that was working very hard trying to get him back to whatever, get his heart beating again. And then her husband saw his hand like this, and he told the nurse, would you please just stop? He's ready to go. And he had told his mom and dad, I had a great life. He knew he was dying, just didn't know when. And then the funeral was at some place in downtown Columbus or something. And she said during the funeral, or at the time of the funeral, his friends had flown up from New Orleans, and they were walking down the street playing the New Orleans funeral music on their way to the funeral. And as I was saying there, I'm thinking, oh, we got to go home. We got so much to do. And then I thought, you know what? This is a gift. I felt like I was kind of giving a gift to her, and she was giving a gift to us to just listen to her story. I mean, it was the end of the day, and it wasn't crowded. There was nobody else around. And I thought, instead of saying, well, that's very nice, and we go, we just sat there and listened to her tell her story. And I thought, that's something that I think is very important, that people, we didn't have to make any comments about it. We just listened to her story. And I think he died maybe a year ago. I'm not even sure when. Do you feel that it can be helpful as a gift to people?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, if we take the time to really take it in and listen and let them share that part. Yeah, I think that's beautiful.
All right, everybody, we are getting close to our time limit. Jackie, thank you so much. This was so interesting. Thank you so much. I learned a lot.
Yeah.
I know, like, as we're sitting here talking,
Well,
I'm
if I
looking
could
up
just
stuff you're saying. It's amazing.
Yeah. If I could just make a comment, I work in collaboration sometimes with Brookdale Hospice, and I just wanted to give them a shout out today. They support my work, and I really appreciate that. They are a local hospice, a smaller hospice. I kind of have my own. I kind of personally prefer smaller hospices, but that's just my own personal preference. Um, I encourage you to go on my website, see whatever classes I have coming up or presentations. I encourage you to email me if you have any questions. I speak at women's groups, at churches. So if you know of anybody or any way I can be of assistance, because for me, it's all about making a better death for everybody by sharing information.
Marvelous. Well, thank you so much, Jackie.
I appreciate the invitation today. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you.
I have heard you speak before. I was looking forward to this. And do you know if you're doing anything with Elizabeth here at the library soon or in the future?
Yes, coming up next month, in April and May, they're a little bit more medical driven, but I think very important information. And it talks about, in April, it's a presentation talking about progression of a disease to death, and it focuses on cancer and Alzheimer's. And I just go over with individuals, because another thing I don't think doctors are good about is explaining to people the progression of their disease of decline and what it will look like, and what they can expect death to be like. So the first one's on cancer and Alzheimer's, and the second one's on heart failure or heart disease and emphysema. In May is the second one.
Put the link to the first one.
And then in June, I believe, yeah. And then in June, here I have my sheet. In June, it will be on, more in-depth information about home funerals and green burials will be that one.
Okay, and if you don't see those on our site yet, it's because registration opens about 28 days in advance of the program. So the chronic illness and disease progression, I did put the link in there. That one is open now for registration on April 13th. And that is a webinar. And then May 11th, CHF and COPD that link is also open for, looks like, for registration early. So good. All right.
The name of the hospice was Brookdale.
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 Mhm. Mhm.
I just put Brookdale Hospice for reference in the
So
chat.
Mhm.
I'd like to thank all of you. I need to go. We have a family dinner tonight, so I have to get going. And so thank you to everyone and appreciate your offering this from the library. Jackie, thank you very much for sharing your expertise
welcome.
and your experience.
Thank
So
you.
Yeah, this
bye,
is marvelous.
guys.
Thank you.
All right, bye, Jodi.
Bye.
All
Bye.
right, Jackie, thank you. I am going to give you a
Bye. You're welcome.
yeah, so everybody, you're going to get a link to this recording, everybody who signed up. Also a list of the transcript. So that list, that reading list and suggestions, you'll get that. And that also includes
Great.
the websites that Jackie mentioned and other information. All right, well, thank you so much for
Great.
coming. And
Thank
Jackie,
you.
good job. This was so
Bye.
interesting. All right,
Hey,
bye
nice group of
everybody.
people.
Everyone.
Yeah,
Bye.
this is fun.
Nice group. Yeah. All
Yeah.
right.
All right, bye
Thanks.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.